Center, this is Southjet 227. We've lost our hydraulics and feels like our pitch control. Did everybody embrace positions? Yes, that is affirmed. We are in a dive. We are in a dive. We have lost vertical control.
Jet 227, I see you descending through 1,000 in return.
On full power.
We lost the left engine! We're losing power on the right!
Despite darkening skies, Delta Airlines Flight 1080 lifted off from San Diego with what seemed like a routine start. Just moments after leaving the runway, however, something went terribly wrong. The aircraft's pitch spiraled out of control, pushing it to the brink of a stall. With every protocol failing, the captain had one last option. He cut the engines completely, a move so drastic it's rarely considered at such a low altitude. To the crew's shock, it worked. But this would be just the beginning of a tense, nail-biting journey as Delta 1080 teetered on the edge between life and catastrophe. It was April 12, 1977. Delta Flight 1080, a Lockheed L-1011, tristar bound for Los Angeles, was at San Diego International Airport undergoing final preparations. On board, Captain Jack McMahon, an experienced and steady-handed pilot, ran through pre-flight checks with First Officer Will Redford and Second Officer Steve Haight. With San Diego's overcast skies looming, the weather wasn't ideal, but manageable. The Lockheed TriStar was still a relatively new aircraft model in 1977, touted for its advanced systems and multiple redundancies designed to handle mechanical issues with ease. For Captain McMahon, this seemed like another routine trip. The takeoff was smooth, the runway fading below them as they ascended. But just moments after lifting off, something was clearly wrong. The aircraft's nose suddenly began pitching up at an aggressive, unnatural angle. Captain McMahon fought to stabilize the ascent, applying full forward pressure to the controls, but the nose refused to level. It continued climbing, defying every input. In the cockpit, tension crackled. They could feel the plane pulling upwards, close to a stall. Emergency protocols raced through McMahon's mind as he flipped through the checklist, but nothing addressed their situation directly. Desperate, he took a risk. He cut the engine thrust entirely. An extremely dangerous move at such a low altitude, but it was his only option. And miraculously, it worked. The nose of the aircraft began to dip, offering them a narrow window to regain some semblance of control. But their relief was brief. Although they were no longer pitching up at such a steep angle, the aircraft was still dangerously unstable, flying in a nose-up attitude that would keep them fighting gravity and physics every second of their journey. As they climbed to a higher altitude, it became clear that controlling the aircraft would be a constant struggle. The more altitude they gained, the more risk of a stall, and the L-1011 showed no sign of leveling. At 9,000 feet, they finally broke through the clouds, gaining a fleeting visual of the ground below. A small comfort as they battled their unyielding adversary, gravity. Captain McMahon and his crew scrambled through every emergency procedure they knew. They adjusted hydraulics, checked the control systems, and even tried to manually trim the aircraft, but nothing stabilized the pitch. They soon realized their only option was to control the plane's trajectory through the engines alone, a precarious maneuver. With nerves of steel, they began adjusting the thrust on each engine, an act of pure coordination and skill. By easing back on engines 1 and 3, while cautiously advancing engine 2, they managed to hold the plane in a precarious balance. But the stability was far from perfect. Every second, they risked losing control, and with every foot of altitude, the stakes grew higher. The situation grew increasingly dire, and the realization hit hard. They needed to land, and soon. The crew informed air traffic control of their emergency and requested an immediate landing clearance at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. Given the unpredictable nature of their descent, LAX controllers cleared them to approach runway 6 right, which led over the open water, a safer route that would spare the densely populated areas of Los Angeles if they lost control. Meanwhile, the cabin crew was instructed to move passengers toward the front of the aircraft, hoping that a forward shift in the center of gravity might help counterbalance the nose-up attitude. The atmosphere in the cabin grew tense, with passengers holding onto their seats as the aircraft struggled against an invisible enemy. As the plane began its descent toward LAX, the crew lowered the landing gear at around 2,500 feet, hoping the additional drag would help stabilize their descent. Instead, the nose jerked sharply upward once more, bringing them perilously close to stalling yet again. Captain McMahon and First Officer Redford leaned into the controls, pushing forward with all their strength, but the plane refused to level out. Then, in a split-second decision, Captain McMahon adjusted the thrust on the engines again, reducing the power on engines 1 and 3, while cautiously advancing engine 2. The nose began to level, slowly aligning with the runway lights glinting in the distance. But they all knew there would be no second chances. They had one shot to land safely. As they approached the runway, Captain McMahon prepared everyone on board for a hard landing. With the sink rate now stabilized, Flight 1080 hit the tarmac with a hard, jolting impact. But just when they thought they were in the clear, another problem arose. The nose of the plane still wouldn't drop. The pilots pushed the control columns forward with every ounce of their strength, and finally, the nose gear touched down, completing the landing. The engines roared into reverse thrust, and after what felt like an eternity, Delta 1080 slowed to a safe taxi. Against all odds, they had survived. As soon as the passengers were safely disembarked, the investigation began. The FAA, Lockheed engineers, and Delta's mechanics combed through every inch of the aircraft. What they found was chilling. A corroded bearing in the elevator system, a small but critical component responsible for controlling the pitch of the aircraft. Over time, moisture had seeped into the bearing, causing corrosion that eventually locked the elevator in a fixed upward position at the worst possible moment: takeoff. Though the Lockheed TriStar was designed with multiple redundancies, this single bearing's failure nearly caused a disaster, revealing a flaw in the system that hadn't been anticipated.
6 seconds after the landing, the aircraft's heading had already veered quite sharply to the left, as much as 20 degrees away from the runway direction. The captain managed to decrease this with about 10 degrees, but the aircraft still departed the runway about 3,200 feet into the landing wall and then continued careening out onto the snow-filled flat area next to it. The left wing soon crashed into the retaining wall, separating the airport from cold waters of Flushing Bay outside, and as it did so, the fuel tank inside the wing ruptured and fuel started gushing out. The first officer now reached over and turned off both engines to try and stop them from creating any more thrust that could push the aircraft further towards and possibly even into the water. This shut down the electrical power to the cockpit voice recorder, so the last thing recorded was the scraping noise of the left wing tearing against the retaining wall.
The FAA responded swiftly, issuing an airworthiness directive requiring immediate inspections and replacement of the elevator bearings in all TriStar aircraft. Lockheed engineers also redesigned the component to prevent future corrosion, a small yet vital upgrade in the name of safety. The story of Delta Flight 1080 shocked the aviation world, underscoring the importance of even the smallest components in aircraft safety. The near disaster became a textbook case, profoundly influencing the industry's approach to maintenance and component durability. For pilots everywhere, it reinforced the principles of crew resource management, CRM, the practice of teamwork, quick decision-making, and clear communication under life-threatening pressure. Captain McMahon, First Officer Redford, and Second Officer Haight each received the FAA's Distinguished Service Award for their extraordinary efforts in saving the lives of everyone on board. Their bravery, skill, and quick thinking became legendary, serving as a powerful reminder of the irreplaceable role human judgment plays in aviation. Delta Flight 1080 is more than just a dramatic story. It's a testament to the resilience of pilots and the critical importance of teamwork. This harrowing experience changed aviation safety standards, potentially saving countless lives with updated protocols and stricter maintenance standards. Thanks to the actions of the crew, what could have ended in disaster instead became one of the most celebrated survival stories in aviation history. If you found this story as breathtaking as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of courage and skill in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds.